there is a class which is connected to Korean science studies, and the speaker is supposed to be short. So that presents a sort of a difficulty, as we have to say something about that Korea and that person, and that's very difficult to do in a few words. I have a decision on actually 3 types of reasons which I would like to present to you. First, there are reasons which have to do with the intellectual achievements of Helga and her research, which she has done over a period of more than 20 years, almost 30 years actually, as her first article in the area of STS dates back to 1973. The second sort of reasons have to do with her role as an instigator and initiator of institutions and programs and new forms of communication in the field of science studies, as well as the social sciences more broadly. And the third set of reasons have to do with her broader involvements in the world of science policy and in the world of politics at large. With respect to the first type of reasons, her academic achievements, she has a long career, and she has published an enormous number of books and monographies, either as editor or as an author. I counted, and we did this a little while ago, so I'm afraid the numbers are already outdated, 27 book publications and more than 150 articles in scientific journals, and no doubt it has grown since, as I was able to observe. I already mentioned her first publication, and you'll probably all be familiar with one of her more recent productions, Rethinking Science, Knowledge and the Public in an Age of Uncertainty, which she published together with Peter Scott and Michael Gibbons. It's characteristic for Helga and her intellectual production that she does not restrict herself or her studies and her work to social studies or science. Throughout her career, she has always has a lively interest in social theory and in sociology writ large, and her publications reflect that sort of interest. So she published a book on time, the sociology of time, if I may call it a sociology. She published on the legacy of the Nordic Alliance and a lot of other topics alongside publications in social studies or science. And I think it's vital to a society like this, and it's reflected in many, the work of many people, that there are these resonances with the broader cultural and social literature, Indian environment. And I think it's vital to keeping this field alive and kicking, and not to become too parochial in our orientation of we ourselves, sitting as a community here, consider to be the right sort of agenda. Turning to the second category of reasons, Helga has been involved throughout the years in establishing new institutions, new programs. It started a while ago with establishing a department for the philosophy of science and science studies in Vienna, and then later on she moved to Zurich, and there she established the Collegium Helveticum. She was involved for many years as an editor of the Sociology of the Sciences yearbook. She initiated an enormous number of workshops and meetings, but taking the broader look again at the social sciences, it was also very important for many people, and I also think for this field, that she was involved in establishing the Collegium Budapest after the breakdown of the Berlin Wall in the 1990s, the establishment of the Academia Europaea, and a number of other institutions for intellectual exchange and for education, educating new generations. Moving quickly to the third part of her accomplishments, her involvement in the wider world of science policy and in policy making. There is again a long list which I cannot simply read out to you here, or what she has been involved in. But let me mention a couple of things. First, there is the involvement in the European Science Foundation's activities and her struggle to renew the agenda for social research through the European Science Foundation. And then, secondly, she was involved in all sorts of policy work within Europe, and that culminated in her appointment as the chair of the European Research Advisory Board, which is the highest advisory board within the EU to the Commissioner for Science and Technology. And I think it's quite an accomplishment to think about as a Society for the Social Studies of Science and Technology that Helga has become the chair of that advisory board, which includes all sorts of scientists as well, representatives for industry. And here again, you see again that quality which I already referred to, this non-parochial approach, this ability to reach out to people who work in the sciences, even in age of science wars, and to communicate with these people and to be open-minded in the contact with these people, to establish new programs, new initiatives, to give advice, and to somehow integrate, even though not everybody may notice it, who is present, the sort of perspectives which we are involved with, the social perspective on science and technology. She's done that in many ways. She retired last year from the Eidgenössische Hochschule, yes, in Zurich, but since she started a new program in which postdocs with a background in biology are asked to think about the society in their science, and the program is actually called Society in Science. And the idea here is to work together with people from the sciences who have a degree there, and who are supposed to return to the sciences later on, and to go back, and to think about the social dimension of what they're doing, in yet another attempt to bridge these, to transgress the boundaries between the various disciplines, to transgress the boundaries between doing academic work and doing policy work. And for all these reasons, as both academic and intellectual, as an institution builder within the field, but also, and not the least of all, work in the wider world as a representative of this community in the sort of perspective we stand for, and her achievements in that respect, we have decided to give the Bernal Prize for 2003 to Helga.
Thank you very much, Rob. I'm deeply moved, and I'm moved for one particular reason in addition to the other reasons that anyone standing here would be moved for, and this has to do with the location. We are back, or I am back in the United States at a time where some of us are very much concerned that the US and Europe may be drifting apart. And the personal and biographical side of liking to be back here goes back when I first addressed an American audience, which by the way was larger than this one, because this was the graduation ceremony from West Lapeer High School in Wisconsin. I was an AFS exchange student, not yet 17 years old. I had spent 1 year in the Midwest of the United States, and exchange is to be taken literally. My school fellows learned about this exotic, distant country, Austria, and I learned about American football and baseball rules. And in addition, before I left, my mother insisted that I should know how to make Apfelstrudel, so this was also part of the exchange. Austria is still a small country in the middle of Europe, but thanks to the recent election of a governor in California, I no longer have to explain the difference between Austria and Australia. My second reference point is, of course, Columbia University. I came back later to get my PhD in sociology, at Columbia, and I had two wonderful teachers there. Paul Lazarsfeld, who taught me that methodology is never only methodology, but always also about substantive issues. And the other teacher was Bob Merton, whom we have commemorated this evening, who was a wonderful teacher and remained a lifelong friend. Retrospectively, I think I learned from him, and this is my way of putting it, I learned two important things from him. The first one was something that Rob also alluded to, and I think it goes back, and I learned from Bob, also to look and to position things into a larger picture. And the second one is that institutions matter, that institutions are always stronger than individuals, although individuals, especially in leadership positions, can make all the difference. So this is my two important reference points to the United States and the word of thanks for these educational experiences, which were very different in type and in length of duration and stay. But my initiation to social studies of science occurred on the other side of the Atlantic. I had, of course, Merton as a teacher, but at that point I did not know as yet that I would move in that direction. It occurred when I spent 1 year at King's College in Cambridge, UK, and there I was asked one day, would I be willing to teach sociology of science, learning and belief, and that hooked me. So much for transatlantic relations on the personal side. I now would like to say a few words why I'm pleased that it is the Bernard Prize. And quoting two words that David Edge used years back in his acceptance speech, how appropriate. I would like to say two reasons why I think the Bernard Prize is very appropriate given my biography and given my work. The first one has to do with an interest in policy studies. I went back to look at the social function of science, and I was struck by the fact how relevant the topics, not the content, of course. You cannot expect a work that has been written more than 60 years ago does not reflect the enormous changes that have occurred since. And of course, the first chapter, the organization of scientific research in Britain, would not be the title you would choose today. It would certainly be the US and not Britain. But the other headings have to do, and the chapters have to do with topics like efficiency, coordination, cooperation. There is a mention of science for the citizen. There is a chapter that is dealing with the recruitment of young scientists, with finance, with strategies for the advancement of science, for science and war, still a very relevant topic, and so on. So there is an issue, these are issues that resonate very deeply with my work also in my practical work, and I regard it as a practice to work in the policy area. But secondly, and Rob mentioned this also when he told you that society in science is something that I now try to put into practice by selecting young postdocs, mainly from the life sciences, who will stay in their field and yet bring a societal dimension into their work in ways that they have to come up with. I think that Bernard would have been a very good candidate for such a fellowship. I came here to Atlanta after spending 2 days in Washington, and I was there as chair of Europe together with a few other members from my bureau. And we were visiting high-level science policy people and institutions like NIH. We went to see the presidential advisor, Jack Marburger, and various other persons. And it was interesting to hear. You always learn a lot on such occasions, but there are a few things that were quite striking, namely to be told that whenever science contributes in the perception of the science policymakers in Washington to economic growth, it is something that the Americans want to keep to themselves and not share it with the Europeans. However, when you want to finance research jointly that has to do with broad questions like the origin of the universe, international cooperation is acceptable and something to be thought for. And I could go on telling you other things that you learn on such visits. But it reminded me also that the kind of visibility that policy studies and science policy studies had in our field in the 70s somehow seems to have been marginalized or has become less visible. And I think it is perhaps appropriate to think about it that at a time when science policy is so much linked together with industrial policy, with economic policy, with other kind of policies, to take a fresh look again and to get engaged in this field. The yearbook in the sociology of science has been mentioned, and the last volume is out. Unfortunately, the publisher did not manage to get a copy here, and I did not bring mine. But in the last yearbook, I wrote an article, which together with a young colleague of mine, Michael Guggenheim, and it was a deliberate attempt also at intergenerational cooperation, in the sense of having a younger and my age, my experience scholar to look and to make a critical assessment of STS. The article has the title, "Joy in Repetition Makes the Future Disappear." And I can only urge you to read it. I will not go into it now, but we make the point that STS has a lot to gain by bringing back in social theory, various kinds and various strands. But at the same time, of course, STS has a lot to offer, especially to other social science disciplines. And this is something that I would also like to deposit here and leave as a message with you. And along the lines of applying something that goes indeed back to Bob Merton, who always said, whatever we say and come up in analyzing science as an institution, we should also be able to apply it to ourselves. We are now engaged in a collective ritual, a very nice ritual of commemoration, of celebration. These collective rituals have in identity building, the solidarity building function also in the language of functionalism. But it is also clear that it is part of a practice. And in a recent volume edited by Nina Amiran, the historian of science, on commemorative practices among scientists, Charles Meyer makes the point. He says that these practices have the purpose, on the one hand, to reincorporate a shared past whose meaning seems destined otherwise to fade. You want to hold on to something that belongs to the past and that you want to preserve. Simultaneously, you want to establish, however, that this object of memory is precisely history. The past is no longer controlling the present. And it is this ambiguity, this ambivalence, that I think we should perhaps reflect on, pause and reflect on. And since I have been working on time, I think that STS perhaps should also try to think how it structures time, and especially how it structures its past, the present, and the future. And it seems to me that we have arrived at a point where we place the past firmly into what I call an extended present. And in this extended present, it's inhabited by ordinary mortals, and there is the risk that joy in repetition makes the future disappear. And therefore, I think the time may have come that we confront the future. The future is always uncertain, but there are many good reasons why we have at least the perception that our futures are even more uncertain, and yet they need to be confronted. They need to be confronted also in the sense that I think we can say that science and technology will continue even more to exert and shape the world to come. And at the same time, there is the paradox inherent in the situation, namely that the more potent science and technology are becoming, the larger the non-scientific, the non-technical, technological part will matter, will subvert whatever science and technology have as an influence or impact. They will infuse it, they will try to direct it. And whether this will lead to a convergence or divergence, we will see what the future brings. But I think that STS, together with other social science disciplines, has an important role to play and to confront this future, even if it remains uncertain. So thank you very much. It is late, and I will cherish this evening and this day for a long time.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure and an honor to hand over the presidency of your society to Bruno Latour. We are such an anarchistic bunch of people that I do not have a hammer that I use in keeping order in council and business meetings, so I'll just shake your hand. Wish you good luck and a lot of pleasure, Bruno.
Thank you very much. Edgar just mentioned extended present, and it was my idea to bring you a motion to extend the presidency of Biber Banquet by 2 more years. He said I should not mention that, and then my friend in Paris said I should not mention that the next meeting in Paris, the food will be much better. So there are 2 things I will not mention. Since I cannot say what I wanted to say, the only thing I can say is that I want to thank, as you can imagine, a great amount of work has been being done by Biber during these 2 years, and you saw in the beautiful eulogies of the past and dead president how sorry we all are for this new sort of twilight zone in which the past president goes into what sort of strange state. And I'm sure that I will be much worse, and I'm sorry I won't be at the level of Biber, but it was a great pleasure to be under the presidency of Biber, and this is a plate that we want to give it to him in honor so that he can remember all the work he did for us. And I welcome you to first thank Biber for the work he did, and then I will, in the name of my friends in Paris and Madeleine Lakish, oh, sorry, you will I just wanted to have 1 set of applause instead of 2, so that's right. of my friends in Paris to welcome you in Paris next year for the next forest meeting, and I put this meeting to a close. Viva
People were trying to I hit a moment and of course it's not really true, it's not president, but he's always so good. It's really not bad to say you're president. Bruno will do more work than this is the thing where he's doing the work. And he was trying to Wes. Wes. Did you know how that name is spelled incorrectly? No, I didn't look at it. But we'll change it. It's happened before. Sorry? I didn't bring up other people. No, I didn't look at it either. He did it. But if it makes you feel any better, it's happened before, and we just change it. Yeah, I said. Yeah, you don't have to change the whole thing. You just unscrew the little names, reprint the name, and put it back on. So why don't I take it from her now, so she doesn't have to come back. We'll ship it to her the mail. Yeah, you better tell me how to spell it correctly. You better tell me how to spell it correctly. I mean, but I think I can.
It's correct on the program. It's on the first night, when I had a good sleep.
Well, that's what I like.
Yeah.
That might be wrong. Might be wrong. You know, these are just like, you know, professional stuff. Yeah. Is this correct? Yes. This is what I told him. Oh. Completely. Oh. No, of course.
Hi, Rob.
Yeah, that's fine. About the I want to know what variation.
It's not to you, yes it is.
I never knew these interviews were available.
Oh, you didn't actually want to know my
Okay, so we just have to tell them.
No, and I really, I really, it was really pushing.